Okay, we're live, everybody.
Excellent.
Well, sweet. So I'll just do a quick round of introductions of the four of us who are on today. We had a tremendous event that was hosted by ColoRail this morning at the governor's mansion that was outlining some of the visionary next steps we're expecting for the Front Range Passenger Rail project, as well as the joint service partnership that's expected to precede it. Just really quick, my name is James. I'm with Greater Denver Transit. We are a grassroots advocacy in the Denver area, mainly focused on kind of the RTD district. Connor, I will pass it off to you, sir.
I'm Connor. I'm the off-grid urbanist. I'm based out of the Arkansas River Valley, one of the founding voices of the Western Rail Coalition that was kind of an offshoot of some GDT stuff that's more focused on the mountains interior. Ooh, did we lose Danny?
We'll see if he rejoins. I'll let you, Noah, you want next?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me. Noah, my background is conductor and engineer for a freight railroad out here in Colorado. I'm a member of ColoRail, GDT, Western Rail Coalition, member of all of it. And I guess I deal with a lot of the technical things and a lot of the heavy rail aspect, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and we are greatly appreciative of your experience and insights as being someone who's actually in the cab. That's absolutely invaluable. So I just re-added Danny. Dan, are you able to hear us all right? Give him a second.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear. Do you want to just a quick introduction for yourself?
Yeah, of course. Hello, I'm Danny. I'm with ColoRail. I'm the vice president of the organization. As James alluded to, we had an event earlier today for our members as well as the general public, held at the governor's mansion, with the hopes of really informing a lot of people about the prospects for both the Northwest Rail and eventual Front Range Rail here in the state of Colorado. ColoRail is a long storied organization. It's more than 30 years old at this point. It got started as a group to save Union Station from bulldozer and has since been involved in a number of other, bringing back the Winter Park Express, saving Amtrak Southwest Chief from being discontinued, and right now working to see the success of Mountain Rail and Front Range Rail as they're in their planning stages.
Well, terrific, yeah. And one of the things that's also really close to my heart that ColoRail was involved with was saving Union Station. Union Station is my neighborhood. That's where I've lived in Denver for the last couple of years. And I consider it to be certainly one of the coolest environments in the state. I'm honored to call it home, and a huge amount of kind of what happened in Denver in our history was because of ColoRail's advocacy, making sure that the state stayed a station. So huge kudos for Jim Suby and the ColoRail team of that era that helped preserve it for a rail future. So yeah, I mean, I think just coming off of the energy that we had, because I think today really was a phenomenal event. We had two really strong panels. We got to hear from Governor Polis on kind of his priorities and laying of the groundwork. We heard from Shoshana Liu from CDOT as well, kind of from their perspective, what are the pieces that they're supporting with. And then we had two really solid panels, I think, that insights into kind of what the next couple of months and the next year is going to look like. And I think one of the big takeaways just from a call to action, right, is that Front Range Passenger Rail District, right, they're planning to go to the ballot. They haven't confirmed it for sure, but they are aiming for 2026 ballot measure. And if insights or if indicators are different, making sure that they're totally ready for 28. But I think from an advocacy standpoint, really hopefully that what this roundtable can talk about is that if the project does go to the ballot in 2026, kind of what can we do as advocates to help frame the project, help put together a pitch for it about really why, someone who doesn't have an affinity for trains already, should support it. And kind of, what we can do to make the most of the next kind of 9 to 10 months, basically. So I think maybe let's start with just explaining to people kind of what the project is. Noah, would you like to take a stab kind of summarizing what is FRPR and what is joint service?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so FRPR, again, as kind of Danny said, was started out of that that FRPR and out of ColoRail. So currently what we have is the FRPR district, which is the district that can levy taxes and actually get this thing, on the ballot and get it funded. So the district currently is along the urban corridor of the Front Range between Fort Collins and Pueblo. They're looking at expanding that service to Cheyenne to the north and Trinidad to the south, as well as long-term expanding out to Albuquerque, even further south. And that may be further on in the future. I guess a new development in this is, as many people who are local to Denver or who have heard may have known, RTD, the Regional Transportation District, which runs the local bus and rail services for Denver, had their fast tracks proposal, which was passed back in 2009. And that was supposed to bring a train from 2004. I don't know why I said 2009. Yes, 2004. I think that, yeah, feels like it wasn't that long ago.
It's been a while.
Yeah, I was 5. Yeah, that was supposed to bring a train, a commuter style train, the same electric trains that we have on the current commuter lines, the B, G, and A. That was supposed to extend the current B line, so it'd run Denver to Boulder and all the way to Longmont. They realized they didn't have the funding for it, and it was sort of replaced with the highway coach service that is the current Flatiron Flyer. So the promise is still there that RTD needs to build this service. And at the same sort of more recently, FRPR, Front Range Passenger Rail, became a thing. And it's along the same corridor. It's on the BNSF Front Range subdivision tracks, between Denver and Cheyenne. And so it kind of all came together. FRPR and RTD sort of joined forces and was like, it is the same corridor. We still need at least a train. Let's get the voters a service because they are paying for it. They have been paying for it and they were promised it. So at least get them started with something. Obviously the FRPR is more inner city. This is a short corridor, which kind of is in between sort of a commuter and inner city, especially to the north. It's only about 73 miles to Fort Collins and between Denver and Fort Collins, and about 120 between Denver and Pueblo. So altogether, it is about a 190-mile corridor. So not a long corridor. So it sort of sits in between that commuter and inner city pattern. But the joint service is the new thing, where FRPR is going to stop at some of the stations that were promised on the B line, and is sort of going to help get a train to those communities that were promised the train, as sort of like it's just a stopgap measure. And then further along in the future, we are going to hopefully have more trains on the Front Range, and we'll also extend the B line, and the B line will act as the local service, and the Front Range Passenger Rail will act as the express service. I believe that brings us up to current day, and hopefully this year they will be voting on the ballot measure to raise a sales tax to get the full service funded.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the political challenge that we have kind of along the corridor, is that there is a group in the north, right, that was promised a train. A lot of folks that we talk to, right, they feel like they've been paying for the train for 22 years, right? 2004, yeah, is a really long time ago. I was 10. That shows you I'm older than Noah. But kind of the interesting kind of political calculus of this is that because there is skepticism of the government's availability or the government's ability to deliver a train on this corridor, right? Could we kind of scrounged together with the resources that exist today, the resources that the state was able to recently create with a series of fees, to put basically something on the corridor, get a partnership with RTD, right, the agency that promised voters a train, get something going, basically. And if there is momentum on that, if there was credible momentum on that, would it be possible, or would that be able to make a ballot measure, right, that would be perhaps asking for sales tax, which is what we think it's going to look like, easier to pass and more likely to pass. And it's been just interesting from kind of my perspective as someone who has been, following this for a while. I had an internship with RTD 12 years ago, where kind of we dug into, at the time, right, it was really obvious at that time, right, to the Fast Tracks project, that funding was an issue, right? So funding has been a core problem on this, as has kind of the approach that RTD's taken with the freight railroads, right? And there was there's been some great work that GDT, the Greater Denver Transit, has created, formed by a lot of folks who had been working on the project at that time, to understand where the pain points and where the fractures were that made the project more expensive, that perhaps kind of added complexity for the freight railroads. And one of the big kind of innovations, right, that has happened in the last couple of years is that there is now a joint powers authority that's being formed right now, where the freight railroad, right, that owns the tracks. That's one of the important things to remember about this corridor. What we're talking about from Fort Collins to Pueblo, almost all of this is private freight-owned track, right? What's totally different today versus 10 to 15 years ago is that the freight railroad is negotiating with one entity that is looking at an intercity configuration across this entire corridor. North-south, the freight companies are interacting with one body and negotiating with one body, rather than, a local transit agency and the state at a higher level. This is something that I think is really credibly going to make this more doable from kind of a project delivery standpoint. But I guess, kind of, Connor, from your perspective, because I know you've looked really carefully at, transit projects that have worked in other states and stuff like that. When you kind of look at Front Range Passenger Rail's kind of political trajectory, kind of how do you see it in terms of the state's future, right? Do you think that, being someone who lives in the Arkansas River Valley, do you view Front Range Passenger Rail success as paramount to the momentum that we're going to have at a state level, or kind of how are you looking at it from kind of a little bit more of afar?
Well, what we've seen also over the last 20 years is, quite a large amount of growth on the Front Range. A lot of people moving to the Springs, Denver growing, and to an extent, we've seen a lot of urban renewal in the area. In fact, in Pueblo, downtown Pueblo, right around their station, is actually quite nice, and there's investment going on there. The Springs, they've with their Olympic Park, they've done some work there as well, and Denver's really led the charge on developing these downtown areas, in kind of in anticipation of, like, this entire region is increasing its density, mostly because there's a wall to the west. You can't do the traditional American model of sprawl. Not to say that there isn't sprawl. Colorado Springs is incredibly sprawly, but there is still some geometric constraints on the western side of this entire corridor. And we can look to other states like the Rail Runner and the Front Runner, which makes me think that the Front Range Passenger Rail needs to have runner in its name somewhere, so we have this nice trifecta.
Can you remind folks where those are? Where is the Rail Runner and where's the Front Runner, and what are they?
So in New Mexico, which is a state with less population and less money than us, less profitable as a state in terms of average per capita income.
GDP per capita?
They managed to pull off a pretty phenomenal service over quite a long distance with really only two major stops on it, being, Albuquerque and Santa Fe. They did not have the nice spacing we have of, Denver to Colorado Springs to Pueblo to Fort Collins and Boulder. Like, we have some really nice urban cores scattered along this line, and Albuquerque or New Mexico managed to pull this off with two. I mean, and there's a lot of criticism of the Rail Runner, but the fact that they have theirs and we don't, kind of shows that we're on the back foot as a Mountain West state. In the same way how Utah's Front Runner, which it runs through Salt Lake City, north and south in the same way how our Front Range Rail would run north and south on the major metropolitan areas. They also have their train, and they've had it for a while, and it's growing and it's increasing in popularity, and they're making improvements. Now, the big thing about the Rail Runner and the Front Runner is that those systems run on their own track that was purchased and built by the state exclusively for their passenger lines, while we're still in a position where we need to negotiate with the freight railroads. But the funny thing is that arguably we're in a state that has more people and more money closer together on a shorter stretch of track than Albuquerque or Salt Lake City do, as the cores on that center. So it's kind of funny how we almost have the perfect situation and more financial resources, but we couldn't bring ourselves to do it yet. And we're going to be third place on this.
Well, I mean, I think definitely there's informative lessons to look at, in terms of how this project could go forward and how we can make it a success, right? There's versions of kind of sharing tracks with freight railroads that work pretty well. I think we've talked before about the Capital Corridor in California being a great example of a partnership between kind of a joint powers district, Amtrak, as well as a Class 1 freight railroad. That started with a couple trains a day, and they ramped up over time. They had a really good contract, I think, is one of the big differences there. But then also, like, we recently had this example of a project in Minnesota, right, that just kind of withered on the vine, right, especially post-COVID. So I definitely think, yeah, from an advocacy standpoint, it is totally worth us, taking into consideration what has worked elsewhere, right? But I definitely
I've got a follow on this one, James.
Yeah, please do.
If you've got one. Yeah, I thought one of the more interesting things that came out of the panel today was that Lisa Kaufman noted that Deborah Johnson educated her on joint powers boards and her experience with them back in California. And I was just wondering, your familiarity with rail issues in California, if you have, I guess, any suggestions or lessons that maybe we could explore in a little greater depth here than we were able to do on the panel. With the merits of using a joint powers board, or some of the things that maybe make that more complicated for other reasons.
Yeah, because there's definitely trade-offs. There's basically there's the mechanism, the interface with how you negotiate with a host railroad, right? So the joint powers structure, right, a lot of that is kind of designed, to combine multiple geographies. In Colorado, part of this is also to deal with the tax districts, right? Is that under based in order to practically fund a new large expense of some kind and take on new debt. Generally speaking, voters have to pass it at the ballot, and that generally, for whatever reason, there's a number of legal reasons for this, but basically you create specific geographically constrained districts to fund a project. So one of the things that California had going for it in certain places was that in the early 1990s, the state DOT basically put together the funding to actually buy up a huge amount of track. So when we talk about California, we talk about Caltrans, Amtrak California as a program, what became the Pacific Surfliner in Southern California, became the Capital Corridor in the San Joaquin in the north, which just got renamed to Gold something, I think. Noah? I'm going to call a friend.
Gold Runner.
The Runner. I think.
Yeah, Gold Runner.
I think the challenge with California, where people would criticize California Rail just put that into its own bucket, given that it's just monumentally more expensive and more complicated, right? The downside with California, especially the Bay Area, is that you have a lot of different transit agencies, and really until recently that they didn't really have compatible fare structures, and it's taken a lot of coordination, a lot of work, right, to be able to interface between Caltrain being managed differently from BART, which is the subway system, different from Muni in the Bay, and then there's Amtrak. So you kind of have layers of this. But I think there's examples in other places, in other states like Virginia, more recently maybe the Carolinas, Massachusetts, where you do have kind of more of a centralized rail authority that oversees different services and different brands, right, that roll up. They're able to kind of organize it centrally and expand from there. That seems to be a model that is also worth considering. That's more of from more of like a structure standpoint. And I think one of the challenges that Colorado has is that because we don't have a recent history of intercity passenger rail, there's a lot of concern that we just don't have enough people locally with the expertise to manage to be spread thin between too many agencies. From an advocacy standpoint, like one of the things that we've been thinking about is that as FRPR is getting off the ground, as CDOT is managing mountain rail, the Colorado Department of Transportation, CDOT, I should define my acronyms, right? Is it possible to address the benefits, right, of how joint powers authority existing to facilitate the negotiation with the railroads, but perhaps to have the legwork be carried out by a more centralized state authority where that expertise could be shared between multiple projects, especially because over the longer run, if this is successful, right, hope is we're going to see more intercity passenger rail projects and extensions and different things. But I mean, I don't know about Danny, if you've heard, of any other states that you think are kind of worth looking at from that standpoint.
Yeah, I'm not sure I know as much about different governance structures as you were discussing there, but I do think that the number of states that have stepped up to run state-supported service, even states that you might not immediately think of as strong advocates for rail, whether it be Oklahoma or North Carolina, where there's a political will, there's a way. So I think Colorado is showing that, our event today showed that there is a lot of political will here. It's a matter of creating a structure, I guess, that works between partnership with the operator, likely, but not necessarily Amtrak, the host railroad, and kind of right-sizing a subsidy amount from the state. I imagine that there are a variety of different structures for how states interface with Amtrak and the host railroads for subsidizing some of the costs. That maybe that would be a great topic for a future conversation, compare and contrast for how different states approach state-supported services on the current Amtrak network. I'm not sure how transparent that is versus how that is kind of behind the scenes, but we can always see what we can find.
So I think this is a good explanation about why the last 22 years have been as difficult as they are and why we kind of feel behind the eight ball in this regard. There's a lot of different groups along the Front Range that collectively like the idea of a train, at least what their idea of a train is. There have been issues with who pays for it, who manages it, who's running on whose track, which territory are we going through. These people have agreed to this level of service. Those people want that level of service. What happens when we have one train passing through the same station or the same city? But let's see if we can get everyone kind of up to speed on what the deliverable is about what Front Range is trying to bring to the region, where people have all their different wants, needs, desires, and if there's a question, what is the answer?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think part of this is going to be meeting people where they're at, right? And I think when you speak to folks who live in the Denver metro and even perhaps outside it, when they think of transit, when they think of trains, a lot of them think of RTD, right? A lot of them think of a regional operator, local buses, light rail to the game, right? A lot of people who don't ride transit all the time, right? Some of the more casual and frequent riders, right? What we hear is that they use RTD a lot of times to go to a Broncos game, to go see, go see football. They ride the light rail into downtown to Union Station. They go to a Rockies game, right? Which is walkable from Union Station. I kind of think for us, right, one of the things that we have to decide, is it worth digging into, right, is demystifying, who's involved. It is that RTD, right, there's a lot of kind of strong feelings about RTD across the district, right? There's some people who are very frustrated with it. There's some people who rely on it and are grateful for it. But especially kind of in this Westminster, Broomfield, Louisville, Boulder, Longmont segment, right, that collapsed with RTD, right? There's people who are thinking, oh, train RTD, right? And what's, so go ahead.
So kind of to an extent of who runs it, there's also kind of what you're used to. So if you live in Denver, and even depending on which part of Denver you look into, you think train, a couple years ago, you might have thought, oh, something that comes every 15 minutes. These days, it's more like something that comes every 30 minutes. And to an extent, if you're in Colorado Springs or Boulder might be like, they think train like, oh, we're going to get an upgrade to the Flatiron Flyer. And down in Colorado Springs, they're like, oh, yeah, that weird Amtrak thing that we kind of have that kind of sucks, where we might get one train a day. So it's one of those things, like, if we get the service that we're proposing on this slide here, where we can get maybe 8 to 10 trains a day, that's something where, from Colorado Springs perspective, they're looking at service that is far better than most Amtrak service in the country. So they would say, oh, well, we thought we were going to get 1 or 2 trains a day. 8 to 10 trains. Okay, this is really nice. But then from a Denver perspective, be like, 8 to 10 trains a day. What is this? This is pathetic. We're used to, multiple trains per hour kind of deal. So you're going to be meeting in the middle in a way where Denver is going to be probably Denver is kind of in a position to really gain a lot from this. But they're going to be kind of like, this is kind of not what we're used to. Meanwhile, everyone else along the line be like, wow, we actually can now boast that we've got some of the best interpassenger rail service in the country, because the bar by Amtrak standards and, American standards is just so low to begin with. But when advertising from Pueblo to Fort Collins, you need to kind of say, hey, you're getting something a bit, might be run by Amtrak in the first place, maybe it's not, but you're getting something a bit better than what the average American thinks of with rail, which is slow, inconvenient, and frequent. We're hoping to deliver something better than Amtrak, but probably a bit not the same thing as just running the heavy rail all the way to Boulder and running it on the heavy rail's historic headways.
So then I think there's 3 critical questions, right? If we were going to approach someone who's uninitiated to this conversation, right? Someone who doesn't know what FRPR front range is, right? We approach buddy about this. And I think the 3 core questions that we got to be ready with bite-sized answers is, okay, what is it? It's a train, where's it go? All the basics of what, right? Number 2 is, so who's going to do it? It's the government. Is it RTD? Who's going to do it, right? Because there's been anxiety about the RTD for this. And then part 3 is, why should I vote for it, right? If you're asking for a sales tax increase, which we expect at the ballot measure phase, that, by the time we're getting the 8 to 10 trains a day level, there's going to have to be, an explanation of why it's going to be worthy, right, of raising sales taxes, especially in a city like Denver, where our sales tax is already really high.
Yeah.
So maybe one of the things we could run through, right, is that this group has put together kind of like an elevator pitch with kind of the first 5 general reasons of like why vote for a front range passenger rail train. But I guess just before we jump into kind of the pitch for it, if we were to put ourselves on the spot, maybe Connor, I'll have you go first. If you had literally 30 to 45 seconds to explain this to someone who's never heard of it before, how are you going to do it? If I hit the timer, you hit go. Let's take a shot at it.
So I'm going to base myself in Colorado Springs for this conversation, because I know that Pueblo is actually quite interested in this idea, which is kind of strange given the demographics, but Pueblo is kind of its own can of worms. But in Colorado Springs, you really want to say, like, what is the most difficult part of getting up to Denver for? Is it the airport? Is it a Rockies game? Is it going to a show? And typically, for them, the drive on I-25 up to Denver is going to be just as bad as trying to find a place to park in Denver. Odds are you're going to end up paying for it somewhere. Maybe you park down on the south side of Denver and you take the light rail in, but odds are you don't even know the light rail exists. So really, it's a matter of saying, like, do you like to go into Denver, yes or no? And if they say no, why? Well, it's a pain in the butt. Understandable. If they say, yes, I like to go into Denver, but, oh, it is such a pain, that's where you just kind of hit them with, like, what if you could get into Denver without bringing your car? What if you didn't have to worry about parking it? You don't have to worry about pay for parking in it. For a lot of people who have stereotypes, you don't have to worry about vandalism or getting it stolen. And what if you can just be walking around downtown Denver and not worry about a meter running? So for them, it's more about, like, how do you extend the range of your front door? How can you, in Colorado Springs, just, drive to a station, take a bus to a station? If you live in certain parts of Colorado Springs, you might be able to walk or ride a bike to a station and just get up to Denver to enjoy what a larger, more world-class city has to offer without the headache that comes with driving in. And for a lot of people, after they have all their fun and they've had a night on the town, maybe they've had a few, and then they have to look forward to a arduous drive back down with millions of other people down I-25 to get back home. So I would just say, like, if this is a way for you to get a back door into the city, no matter where you are on the Front Range. James, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks. So yeah, how about so if you were to go next, if you pick a city that you're in, and if you were to explain what this was, and you were going to open a conversation with somebody who was completely uninitiated, how would you start the conversation?
Yeah, actually, I mean, I was going to do like all the cities in general, and I was just going to say that for the whole corridor, you know, Connor, as you sort of touched on, like, yes, it's opening up, you know, connections and stuff. You can go to games and commuting and all that. But for the whole thing, like, it really is the best bang for the buck. This is one of the best transit or transportation projects in the state that connects like the most amount of people, that allows for, you know, the car free or car light options. Like, you know, as Connor said, like, you're not relying on a car, you know, and all the points you had there. And even for people who don't want to take the train, can't take the train, like they're too far from the station, even if they're like outside of that, you know, if they're more than say like a mile outside of the station, you know, because the district does extend widthwise for a little bit. And the argument from a lot of those people against it is like, well, I'm not next to the station, so I can't really get to the station. It's like, yes, that's fair. Some of the stations may be park and rides that you can benefit from that. Obviously, park and ride's not the best option, but really it's all about, it'll reduce traffic on the highways and the main roads, you know, going north south. You know, I-25 and Highway 285 are the, you know, the two big ones mainly. You know, and there's a lot of commuting patterns. I-25 sort of covers the whole district there. Highway 285 really it parallels the tracks sort of Broomfield to Longmont and then Loveland and Fort Collins. And there's a lot of, not only is Denver a commuting hub, but Boulder is a commuting hub, Fort Collins is a commuting hub, Colorado Springs is a commuting hub. So it's bringing multiple of those commuting hubs in one line. And it's, yeah, again, just the best bang for the buck of, you know, getting people off those highways. So yeah, even if you're not taking the train, you will have less traffic because we're pulling people away from the highway. The people that can take the train will no longer take the highway, and it'll, you know, reduce congestion overall.
And whether we like it or not, you know, Colorado Springs and Denver and the Front Range in general are becoming one of the nation's next new mega regions, which, unlike most mega regions, we actually have, as you can see on the map here, that geographic bottleneck, which is kind of keeping the sprawl in check, like a wave crashing upon the rock, and building up density along this entire corridor, which is pretty tight. I mean, considering the relative distances between these stations, where even if you're traveling at modest American rail speeds on freight-owned track, you know, you're still moving a lot of people. You know, the gravity model for this is pretty strong. It's actually one of the strongest in the country right now, outside of, like, you know, the Texas Triangle. And the Texas Triangle is only really strong because Houston's so big.
So Danny, how about you? If you were to kind of meet somebody who's probably uninitiated and stuff like that, how would you kind of open the conversation?
I would love to do a 45-second elevator pitch and try it out. So this is kind of echoing a lot of what I heard at the meeting and just kind of compressing a little bit. So everyone knows that I-25 is really tough at peak hours, and increasingly so on weekends and some off-peak hours as well. Just the capacity is not there. And so creating an additional option via rail up and down the Front Range from Fort Collins to Pueblo, not only will it make travel easier during those peak periods, it will also make travel easier for students who are enrolled in institutions all the way from CSU Fort Collins to CSU Pueblo and the institutions in between, for elderly folks who are maybe no longer comfortable driving or comfortable driving in high traffic conditions. It's a way to increase the amount of options people have for their mobility in the region. So if you want to drive, you still can, and you will be you'll benefit from the fact that others are taking the train because the roads will be less crowded. But this is just creating a transportation option that everyone can use, whether or not they feel comfortable driving and whether or not it's rush hour.
Mm-hmm.
How about that?
Yeah. Oh, you're still muted, James.
I'm just gonna not be on mute. I don't think I have any background noise. But yeah, I think the rush hour experience that people have had on 25, especially in and around the Denver metro area, but even Colorado Springs 25.
Oh yeah, that road is awful through there.
Sucks. It's awful.
I mean, it's been under construction for like the last 10 years, and it's so bumpy.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Denver airport, that it's always under construction.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think.
I think the rush hour is something people really can grasp immediately, even if they don't always have bad experiences on I-25. They've had enough, and the idea of those rush hour conditions creeping into, Saturday afternoons, other times, is something that will motivate them to think, oh, yeah, well, if we don't do this, we're going to see worsening conditions at even the good times on I-25.
And to the businesses that the sales tax will be levied on, in addition to all purchases made, but really the businesses, it'd be nice to communicate to them. Think about the trips that don't happen just because someone's considering driving up to Denver or driving down to Colorado Springs. Like, I-25 is going to be a mess. I'm just going to stay at home. There's a lot of latent business potential and latent commerce that just doesn't happen because when people get in their heads like, I-25, I don't want to touch that today, and they just decide to stay home. It's really hard to quantify that, but talk to anyone who's ever had that thought where it's like, hey, you want to go to Denver? What, Denver on a Friday night? No. Are you crazy? This is dumb. I mean, you better have a really good reason to fight that much traffic. And most people, they do the calculus in their head. They're like, yeah, not worth it. I'm going to stay home, watch Netflix, just not get involved in any of that traffic.
The one thing I think that that reminds me of that I didn't touch on at all was the people who are coming to Denver for a specific thing. Like, it doesn't have to be a sporting event or a concert, but just for, say, I don't know, meeting friends on the town who are, you went to college with and it's been years, but you don't necessarily want a car yourself, and having the option to, well, we're going to go out in downtown, but I won't have to worry about parking. It's when parking itself becomes a liability along with the traffic. I think that's a untapped point here as well, because downtown Denver is pretty compact and walkable. Chances are, if you take a train from anywhere on the Front Range to Union Station, you'll be able to get to your destination either walking or within a very short kind of connection on bus, train, or scooter, whatever.
And I will say, a lot of people, I've been in this camp too. If you're not very familiar with Denver's layout, you can easily come into town and find the most expensive parking spot in town because you just don't know any better. And to an extent, this is really an area where Google Maps is not your friend. It's trying to make your life convenient, not necessarily cheap. So you can definitely have some sticker shock if you're not aware of the cheap places to park. Not that there should be cheap places to park in a city, but the locals know where to park. They know, oh yeah, you park 2 blocks away over here, you take a bus in, it goes from a $23 ticket to a $5 ticket at this parking garage. So, to an extent, there is all that where a lot of people get frustrated trying to find a place to park, and eventually, like, screw it, I've been doing laps in downtown Denver, that one, I'll park there and I'll just whip out the credit card, I'll pay whatever the toll is because I'm tired of looking. We were supposed to be at our reservation 5 minutes ago, and it just adds to the hassle. That is, it is monetary, but it also is a deterrent for a lot of people who are they experience it once or twice, like they write off all of downtown Denver because they only know how to get there by car, and they have 1 or 2 bad experiences, and they're just like, yep, screw it, I'm not going that. I write off all of downtown Denver. Don't even want to go. It's not worth it.
So I've already got gears going in my head of kind of maybe adapting and maybe broadening some of the talking points. But shall we fly through just the pieces that we have already, just in terms of kind of the five synthesized pieces, and then we'll kind of revisit them?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. So why vote for a train? Why build a train on the Front Range? I think there's kind of 5 or 6 buckets that we can plug this into. And I think from what Danny's saying, I'm almost wondering if we're going to make a couple broader. The first ones that just come off the page, and I need to find a better picture that shows what I-25 actually looks like at rush hour, not when it's at its best at like 11 a.m. on a Sunday morning. But basically, just I-25 is not getting better. People who lived in Colorado for a long period of time, I-25 was a mess 10 years ago, right? We needed this train. I think a lot of people agree who deal with this, who go to Denver, go through Denver, go to Colorado Springs. We needed this train 10 years ago. That's problem number one. I-25 is just not getting better. We're not going to be able to widen ourselves out of this problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
So point number 2, right, is that this is just a better way. A train is just a better way to go to a game or a big concert in Denver in particular, right? It's a way where there is no traffic on the highway going to Denver and back. You're not dealing with the parking, especially at, a really expensive national league venue, right? You're gonna have fun in both directions, right? And especially one of the things you can do responsibly on a train that you cannot do driving, right, is that you can have another one. You enjoy another beverage, an adult beverage, and it's okay if you take transit, right? You can enjoy hypothetically a Bloody Mary on the way up and maybe a beer on the way back down in the afternoon if you want. It's another way, it's a more fun way, to actually go and enjoy yourself and not have to be super worried about whether or not you're waiting long enough to drive responsibly, right? It's a responsible way to enjoy it, right? Then number 3, this is a long-running one. That's the idea that you can multitask. One of the things that you will really struggle to do on even a bus, but much on a car, right, is you can't bring out your laptop on a flat table that's big and be able to get stuff done, enjoy a movie, get some emails, something that is really only comfortable and plausible to do in motion on a train, right? And then finally, right, not finally, semi-finally, the campus connector, right, for the youth demographic, right, this is a really serious investment in the future because there's a ton of families out there who do not have a spare car. They cannot afford a spare car when their kid turns 16. They probably also don't have for room and board either. So especially as hybrid higher ed programs are going, we've got so many universities up and down the Front Range that this train is going to plausibly open a new door to, especially for kids who are going to a hybrid program. They're living at home. They're only needing to go to campus a couple of times a month, right? This is going to give them a superb way to do this without the huge expense of having to rent a car or buy a car. Then neighborhoods. Up and down the Front Range, we've had historically underinvested city centers, right? We've got places like Louisville that is beautiful, right? That when you unlock some of these areas with a train service, right? You build a station district, you create the infrastructure for that, right? We've got a formula to create thriving, new, reinvigorated city centers all up and down the Front Range, right? And this is the responsible kind of living. And there isn't really a secret. There's no secret agenda to try to take away people's car. But what we are doing is to say, if you have a car, if you live in one of these neighborhoods, you're not going to need to use it every day, right? Outside your door, a quick walk. It's a walk to you to a coffee. Be a quick bike ride between you and a restaurant and stuff like that. It's that sort of development that is anchored around rail, right? That is that enduring development cycle that we've seen work in Union Station in Denver, but also in other cities all across the West. So what I'd like to say, and I'd like to refine this with you guys' feedback, is that credibly, we're not just voting for a train. What we're doing is we're voting to bring economic value, responsible, sustainable growth back home with you, right? That is why you're going to vote for a train. It's not just for a train abstractly. Watch the mountains fly by, go home in style, enjoy a beverage on the way up or down, skip parking, skip the traffic, and enjoy the journey. I think that's basically the pitch. But already, a couple of things just critiquing this, right? Danny, from what you were saying about parking, right? And traffic. That's bigger, right, than just sports games, right? That's bigger than just a Broncos game, right?
Yeah, it's not just sports. I think concerts are something that we might forget about, but I'll never forget the Taylor Swift week.
Oh yeah, when Taylor came to town and he basically shut down the city for 3 days.
People have a desire to come to events in Denver that may not be sports, and either still get home that night, or if they do want to stay a night, have a way to get back the next day and still not have to worry about parking their car at Ball Arena or places like that. So one other thing I just wanted to note, James, I think it was pretty clear on the panel you were on today that different people were talking about how to sell this project in different ways because of different communities they've come from. I think to some people it is I want to be able to have a drink and not worry about driving home. I think for others it's really that affordability issue, like, well, I can't let my son or daughter take a car to college because we don't have a spare car, or my aunt is 94 years old and I don't let her drive anymore, or thinking a little bit more about how it might how the message might be tailored better depending on who we're talking to. I think that's kind of a big part of selling it effectively, right? To some people, well, the traffic doesn't matter if you are too young or too old to drive, right? So there's a lot of tailoring, I think, that could be done based on the audience. Obviously, if we're talking about general promotion, general brochures, it's like, well, we want to like put each of the bullet points on our materials or emails or what have you. But I think if it's an opportunity to talk with like a university affiliated group or a senior affiliated group or a business affiliated group, what we lead with can and should be different.
So piggybacking off on that with that comment I made earlier about how a train really gives you a back door into a city center, you're talking about students being able to commute in and out of a city relatively easily, and then people who do have cars and don't have cars. But there's another factor here that works as well that doesn't have four wheels, and that is kind of the rent leveler that a train can be, where to an extent some people don't drive into the city that their university's in. They rent an apartment or they rent a dorm, and to an extent they're kind of forced to pay the going rate of that apartment, even if just to have the convenience and the proximity to their university. When a reliable transit system, which is predictable for the most part, even if it's slower than driving, but it's reliable and it's consistent, would allow a student to instead get an apartment maybe in Colorado Springs or another one of the stations, and then commute to where their university is, where to an extent the train kind of brings that apartment closer into a new zip code. So they're able, now you're actually seeing where rents can become more competitive, because now downtown rents need to compete with everyone along the corridor within reason. The further you get away, the less the effect is. But you're able to, instead of renting a very expensive apartment in Denver, you could rent a cheaper apartment in Colorado Springs, as long as you're nearby a transit station that you can take this train into the city center. And even if the train, you have to wake up very early in the morning for it to be useful, well, you can sleep on that train, or you couldn't sleep. Like, would you rather sleep on a train for an hour and 15 minutes or do a stressful drive for 50 minutes? Given the option of driving in to attend your classes, where you can show up refreshed, you can study, you may be able to read up and read a book, or just sleep on your way into your classes, instead of a white knuckle, oh my God, how am I going to not die on I-25 this morning trying to get to my chem lab?
So do you guys want to tackle a really hard question related to what you just said, Connor?
Go for it.
Okay, so what if you get a question from somebody who's kind of already a skeptic, and they say, okay, well, hey, It's easy to get to Denver. How are how is this project not just making more cities a suburb of Denver? And you're going to make all the places more expensive by making it a suburb of Denver. If somebody said something like that to you, how would you react to that?
Well, to an extent, there's two sides to that coin, and they're not wrong in the ability of Denver to expand its reach from the inside and for people outside of Denver to extend their reach into Denver. But at the same time, we're living in the era of supercommuters, people with hour-plus long commutes. So if this is a democracy, people are already opting to make Denver a suburb from places like Conifer. And even RTD already has a footprint up in Conifer. So to an extent, I'd say that's already happened. This is just a more efficient way to do it. And this is what people are opting to do. They're spending their time and money, and they're wanting to live in one place and work in another. Even with the work from home trend, I mean, people are still opting to do this.
So basically, though, in that conversation, would you concede that this train is going to make those other places more expensive? Or do you feel like that do we have the research that we feel confident about is that, no, there's going to be new development, there's going to be new housing, right? The thing that makes the train worth it is, right, we're going to hopefully unlock, right, new apartments, new condos, new thriving places to live. Mm-hmm. What tack would you take cost standpoint?
Well, to an extent, we wouldn't be building a train if there weren't a demand for people outside of Denver to get into Denver and people inside of Denver to get out of Denver. You know, the solution to transportation is no transportation. If people were perfectly happy and content wherever they were and they had access to everything their life needs, we wouldn't need any of these trains. But that's not true. Cat's doing something. But that's not true. There is still a demand for locomotion between these locations. So to an extent, it's kind of like saying, like, why does anyone have a car? Why can't they be perfectly happy where they are? You know, you don't need to travel. You can do everything you need to do from home. So the criticism is kind of like, will Denver be made a suburb? It's kind of like, well, if Denver's a suburb, if you're afraid of Denver turning the rest of Colorado into a suburb, take everyone's cars away. But, you know, it's kind of like you're kind of acknowledging what's already happening. So it's not really something I need to fight. It's like, well, you know, I'm one voice in the choir, but people are already opting to do that.
Danny, what would you say if you got that question?
Yeah, that's a tough one because a lot of it is theoretical. There's no guarantee that if you build a train from Greeley to Denver that suddenly Greeley rents are going to look like Denver rents. But there may be like small localized effects. I'm unaware of like any good academic literature looking at this. I'm always like of the sense of like, well, why don't we see if this has been actually studied in a robust way before just relying on conjectures. Mm-hmm. But I'm not sure. I think there's an argument, but my thought would be that it would be so localized that it wouldn't have a large widespread effect. I think, you know, James, we were at the Bennett Young Leaders event back in November, and I was at a table with folks predominantly from Pueblo, and they were talking about how there are landlords in town that control a lot on one side of town and are basically inflating the rents over what the market would normally be able to charge because the market's power was concentrated in too few hands. And so I bring that up is I think there are far more, like there are other drivers to things like rent prices that this would be very minuscule if it had any effect at all. It would be hyper localized and not something that would say substantively increase the cost of living in Pueblo for the median family.
So yeah, I would say like as a tool, if this were implemented, I mean, all it's going to do is increase competition. Because, you know, if someone says, well, I can rent for this much less over here, and then, you know, my train fare is this per month, and the math works out, you know, I know we live in America and we love our monopolies, especially our geographical monopolies and our hydraulic monopolies. we love to say capitalism this, capitalism that, but the fact of the matter is we have taken the competition out of capitalism many, many administrations ago. So anything that can reintroduce any new competition into the system will hopefully drive prices down, because capitalism doesn't bring prices down. Competition brings prices down. Capitalism just concentrates power in the hands of a few, then they exploit everyone else.
So basically, would this be just kind of trying to draw a common thread between Danny's points and your points, Connor, is that really the bigger point is that this is a rising tides investment, right? Is that train opens up options for people, right, to not drive. The places that you can take the train to, you can drive already, right? And most people in Colorado overwhelmingly have access to a car, right? One of the crazier stats that I think a lot of transit advocates need to contend with is that even the folks below the poverty line in Colorado disproportionately have access to vehicles of some kind, whether they own them or borrow them, right? So basically, I think kind of what you're maybe saying, Connor, in the heart of it is that the connections are already there. People are able to drive and are doing super commutes today. This is giving people a more economical, more sustainable, more safe, better option. And then, Danny, to your point, right, is that if there are affordability concerns, right, they're either going to be high local, but the bigger point is that this is going to bring investment, and this is going to bring, I guess, just maybe investment, right, to places that are either historically underinvested or places that have maybe been kind of overlooked, right? Or to your point about the competition, right, the mega developers, right, that in Denver, maybe there's been, too few developers who, get really, really big parcels and stuff like that. If all of a sudden, we're going to be looking at places that, have a larger amount of small owners and stuff like that, the benefits and the economic benefits are going to accrue to those kind of smaller, small pot, local folks too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're trying to level the playing field here and give people options to live in different ways that might take a while for the market to catch up with. But in that medium, you might be able to find some really good deals and be able to, for a lot of people that might be super commuting, you take the train, all of a sudden they can take a massive gas bill out of their monthly budget. Maybe they'll be able to downsize, and they might still have a car in the family or a car in the household, but they can get rid of the second car and the insurance and the oil changes and the tire changes and the liability. So there are ways where people can shed financial burdens if they had access to something consistent and reliable to build their life around.
So then I guess to review all of this stuff, we were going to revisit our arguments. I guess maybe, Noah, I'll give this one to you. Of our basic arguments, of kind of the 5 or 6 things that we talked about, for a generic audience, what to you do you feel like is the most powerful thing? And we're talking to the general public, not to young people or old people, whatever, just general stuff. What do we start with?
Yeah, I think for the general population that maybe cares less about the environment or specific issues as you've identified, that I think the biggest one, it's going to be a toss-up between spending time in traffic and money. And really, spending time in traffic is money. So I guess it boils down to a money thing of like, how efficient is your commute, or is your, as we said before, like, it's not necessarily commuting, but how efficiently can you hang out with friends or travel to see family or things like that, travel to the airport. That's day to day. That's what people run into, is the travel time and the congestion on the highways. And then sort of maybe month to month, people are looking at how much they're spending on gas, how much they're spending on maintenance and vehicle insurance, all that stuff, for sure.
And to an extent with that competition, I mean, there's lots of hydraulic monopolies here. For example, airports, where maybe, because Denver's a bigger airport, it typically has a cheaper fare to fly into, but that's usually leveled against by the parking fees associated there. But people in the Springs might be able to take the train up to Union Station, take the A train over to the airport, fly out of DIA. And once a lot of people start doing that, maybe the Colorado Springs airport, the airlines there will get kind of a check and be like, people are doing that. Oh, we can't have that. We got to lower our prices. Because for right now, they're like, oh yeah, you could drive up to DIA, but do you really want to do I-25? Do you really want to park your vehicle at DIA? So, kind of breaking down some of these geographic barriers and opening people's eyes to like, actually, you can reorganize and, try something different that historically in a car dependent paradigm was unthinkable.
Yeah, and vice versa too. I mean, now you can have, in the rare chance that Colorado Springs is maybe cheaper than flying out of Denver, or you were actually able to find a flight, DIA is potentially getting too busy, then you have that option of going to the Colorado Springs airport, or Fort Collins if they ever start running commercial flights out of Loveland, Fort Collins again. But yeah, I mean, the options, I guess, for your original question, James, I guess the second point then would be options of just expanding options, for everybody, like you said, students, older folks, people who are commuting, people who are going to games and stuff. Yeah, having an option other than driving and parking, paying Uber or something like that. Yeah, get an option out there that is cost effective.
So options and cost. Danny, what do you think?
I feel like we're kind of covered most of what I've been thinking already. I'm not sure if I have anything novel to add right here.
But just in terms of the most powerful single sentence or phrase, right? So Noah, it's options. Connor, you're basically kind of appealing to the wallet, to pocketbook, right? Time is money. Is there anything that what we've talked about you feel like is kind of most appealing to a general audience that you would say we should kind of start with?
Yeah, I mean, in my elevator pitch, I think the options was my top concern. I do think that, given the affordability issues like right now that I think have sprung up in just say the past year and a half in our political conversations, it maybe if that's what the climate is in the months leading up to the ballot initiative, that should take front and center. But I think those are the top two if we want to condense it. I do think having an elevator pitch where you can go through 4 bullet points is better than just saying one. But I'd say those are generally the strongest points.
Well, there are very few things that any state can do that are a long-term economic growth option. And to an extent, America did a big one in the 1950s and 60s with the Interstate Highway Act. But, we're kind of at the point of diminishing returns. But it's undeniable that the interstate highway system, with the amount of public money, with a 9-to-1 match. So the state would match you $9, or the federal government would match you $9 for every $1 that your state put. So it's basically free money. And we built highways like crazy. And yes, I mean, in hindsight, it was a very silly and anti-environmental, very pro-consumerist, pro-auto industry, post-war fever dream. But yes, it did have incredible economic impact where all of a sudden every single town had a gas station, every single town had a dealership, every single town had a car shop. So, and you created all these jobs, you created all these new, people basically stopped riding trains and transit altogether. And, to an extent, we then systematically dismantled all that infrastructure. But all this new action through the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, the car companies were hiring people to build cars. You had people maintaining cars. And all the different things you could do with a car that you can't do with a train. But to an extent, we were at the kind of end of that story where now we're kind of stuck with the running costs, and we've acclimated to that economic boom that it provided, where now we just kind of have the mess, but not the benefit. So another mobility infrastructure project like this is one of the few things that might be able to rebuild some of that growth. But instead of something that pitters out in 3 decades, this would be something that hopefully would provide that long-term sustainability that highway travel never could.
Well, especially like kind of the induced demand argument about, building lanes versus, putting trains, especially on existing track, right? Is that, I think there's a lot of evidence, and some people just don't want to hear it. And I think this is where we got to be a little bit careful with the audience, right? Is that the one more lane bro, thesis has been tested to death, and we know it doesn't work, right? And especially if I-25, we talked about, we'll talk about mountain rail in the future, talk about I-70, right? There are places where you physically cannot add a lane without unbelievable cost, right? And this is kind of one of the things where if we're trying to be efficient with the taxpayers' money, right? If we're trying to actually unlock value for people's lives, right? And build something that people are going to use, it's going to benefit the region, it's going to provide that, sustainable, that sustainable form of growth. This is actually the more fiscally prudent option in a lot of ways. I think very credibly.
Yep. Floyd Hill was minimum 700 million for 7 miles. And it might save 5 minutes. Money well spent.
I kind of doubt it's going to be 700 million when it's done.
Oh yeah, it's going to cross the billion. It's probably going to be like come out as like 1.4 billion when it's all said and done. Oh, and we only had to blow up a mountain and build, bridges across a beautiful canyon.
Well, at least they are making it safer. That's the one thing I will say as someone who has driven that stretch of road. That did seem like some version of that project would need to get done eventually, but not to the exclusion of highway only infrastructure. And I think another element that we can take is that, we've invested a lot in our highways really consistently over the last 30 to 40 years, but driving is one tool in the toolbox. I think, Connor, the podcast you did with the Salida folks a couple months ago, I think was terrific because you made that bridge to, you have a tool for, why are you trying to have a single tool in the toolbox to attack every problem, right? And, transit, mobility, intercity passenger rail that is frequent and useful and reliable, right, is fundamentally going to be, it's another form of mobility that is going to be better for people who are going to the downtown areas where parking is a mess, who are going to be going during, high traffic periods of rush hour. This is just a fundamentally better option that we're going to unlock for far less money than the amount of money you'd have to spend to build and expand highways to save that equivalent amount of time or convenience and all the amount of additional parking you need to unlock and stuff like that.
And that's just theoretical. You don't even know if you can. In many places, even if environmental regulations were suspended, it's physically impossible to, it's borderline fiscally impossible, if not literally impossible, to add more lanes in some of these places. Because you just, two lanes cannot occupy the same space.
No. So I see that we've passed the hour mark. I think one of the things that, the way that I'm looking at some of these slides, right, is that these are living slides, these are living talking points. So we're going to refine this. We're workshop this, in our respective groups and sharpen this as much as we can, right? But I guess just kind of before we close out the front range passenger rail topic, because we'll do more of these roundtables for other projects. Is there anything else just for closing thoughts about just advocating for this, putting the puzzle pieces together, communicating this, that you guys think warrants further discussion in the future, or just kind of closing thoughts as you're walking away from this conversation? Maybe starting with maybe Noah, you haven't talked for a while. We'll start with you. Closing thoughts.
No, I don't know if I actually can add anything at this point. I think everything we've said has been fantastic and on the nose.
Connor, how about you?
Well, I kind of try to keep my nose to the ground on this, as being, talking with people that you meet in person, talking with people that I come across on the street. And I will say it's probably not as hard of a sell as we think it is, because if you know where to look in the right places, watching the nightly news when they talk about this massive traffic jam here, this huge traffic accident there, you'll see just look in the comments, and you'll see people saying, just build the damn train. Or, there'll be a lot of sarcastic comments about, like, in Europe, this wouldn't be a problem. The zeitgeist is changing, and we're starting to see that the narrative from many transit projects is getting out, and the fatigue associated with the auto industrial complex is waning. People are just getting sick and tired of gas. Right now, gas is cheap. Yeah, gas is cheap, but that is about the only thing cheap about owning a car right now. Your insurance rates are going up. You're seeing new vehicles go for almost as what a houses cost in the 90s. You're seeing more wear and tear as roads are being struggled to be maintained, and that wear and tear is then bounced onto your vehicle. So there's a shift that if you know what you're looking for, you can see a big shift happening where we're not trying to pitch a train in the 90s or the early thousands anymore. The younger generations and even the older generations are starting to open their eyes and consider new options.
Optimistic, I love it. Danny, how about you, sir?
Yeah, I would say I'm hesitant to lead with just saying the affordability angle, but Connie made some really good points. I think the cost of car ownership is high, and helping people envision that there is something. Yeah, how to live like the car light lifestyle. This is what we talked about today. Can you envision using your car for fewer trips? I know that doesn't get at the core of the having insurance on your car or owning the car in the first place. So that's tough from the affordability side. But yeah, sorry, I'm rambling. I'm not sure I have this kind of cogent takeaway here.
Well, the big dollar
my biggest takeaway is we have to tailor our message to our audience.
Yeah,
is what I would say. Like, never miss an opportunity to do that, and know who you're talking to, and know how to relate rail to their lives. Because a lot of times I'll talk with folks on the ski train when I'm volunteering, and they have obviously found a need or desire to ride the train to Winter Park, but could they also envision themselves riding it up and down the Front Range? And usually if I, give a 2-minute spiel, a lot of them will very much say, oh yeah, that would be useful for my son or my mom or my, etc. So I think knowing how to meet our audience where they are, as James said today, we have to meet people where they're at. How about that?
I've got one too. I can come back to me. Adding to what you have both said, and then maybe adding a couple new points. Like talking to people, a surprisingly large amount of people I feel like that I talk to sort of like they want a train. They've heard of the train, or they've heard that there will be a train, and they're like, yeah, that sounds great. They don't necessarily know what it entails, and they may not necessarily know the cost of it, which is maybe a sticky point, but like fundamentally people hate traffic. They hate spending money on their vehicle. We know this. We go to Europe and they have good options. We love it. We love the transit over there. And so people sort of instinctively, they go, yeah, a train makes sense. And again, specifically the younger generation they're not getting licenses. They're not wanting to pay for cars. They don't want to drive. They don't want to deal with it. And I think we are seeing that shift coming in, not just like of more advocates coming on board, but just the whole shift culturally of we hit cars hard in the 60s and 70s. We went, oh, it's going to be all car travel, 100% cars. Let's build. And now we've kind of hit that recoil, or that dead cat bounce, if you will, I guess, using an economic term, of we're coming back from that. We've realized our failures, and it is time to build back the trains that we once had. We used to have a lot of this, and it made sense. This corridor has been built on the passenger trains that used to run. That's why it works so well. So I think there's some good news overall of, the generational shift. I think will fix a lot of this, and that people are shifting toward cars, whether they're doing so like consciously or not.
Yeah. And when you look at what the auto industry and the insurance industry is doing, they're acting like they've got a monopoly on transportation. And they're not even really hiding it anymore. It's, pardon my language, but they got us by the balls, and they're squeezing and they're pulling, and they know they can, and they know they can get away with it. And that's why you're starting to see people kind of getting more desperate for options, because they're just like, I just feel like my insurance company just jacks up my rate every month just because they can. Because, like, what option do you have? All the other insurance companies, it's a racket. All the other car companies, it's a racket. And this is what you see kind of in the late stage of monopolies, is just when they get a bit too greedy and a bit too confident. That's kind of when they're right about to be checked by something they didn't anticipate.
Well, I think, Connor, some of the points you're making, and I think coming back to Danny's point about making sure that we're tailoring this toward our audience, right, is that you will certainly find people who are really frustrated with driving, really frustrated with how expensive it is, affordability issues. I do think that there will also be a whole bunch of people who kind of like, that's all they know, right? All they know is a world where their car is what they take to get places, and it's difficult for them to imagine an alternative.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things that I enjoy this morning as part of the ColoRail event is that on my panel we got asked the question of, like, what put you on this trajectory to care and be interested in transit, and I reflected on my story of having a formative part of my childhood in Germany. And one of the other things that I didn't share this morning that I also still remember is that family, friends, and the people that my parents spent time with had cars, right? But what they didn't do is they did not drive them into the city. City center did not have cars. And part of that was that it's miserable. And I revisited this when I came back to Germany for an internship as an undergrad. We went on the Autobahn. And a lot of Americans think, oh, Autobahn, I've heard of that. You're able to drive as fast as is safe, and you can take a Porsche out there. I can tell you multiple weekends where we went to the lake or whatever with the German family I was living with, the Autobahn was a parking lot. Like, they have traffic issues over in Germany too, and it's horrible. And I think what is important, and that's coming back to the point we were talking earlier about options, right, is that it's selling this other point, right, which is that we have invested in one form of transportation infrastructure in this country, and we can feel it because you get stuck and there were no other options. There was no bypass, credibly, in a lot of places to take the train. So that's where I'm trying to put together kind of what, Danny, what you were describing about kind of coming back to the affordability piece as a lead for this, and Noah, your options piece. Because I like, if I'm picturing like an advertisement for Front Range Passenger Rail, I almost feel like they're a shared experience that people have of being in their car in traffic and just, banging their head against, the steering wheel, of just like, oh, it's taking forever. And then imagining there is a better way, and showing someone sitting on a train, flying down the tracks, enjoying a coffee or something like that with their computer very comfortably, and just kind of reminding people there's actually a better way. At least on I-25, there's a better way. And if I'm going to kind of cluster the pieces that we talked about, trying to cluster them into two, I almost feel like you can basically kind of take the options piece, where you will have an option to have no traffic, no parking. You will have a better option to go to the game, the Taylor Swift concert. You can kind of cluster those pieces together. Another option to go and have these enjoyable experiences. And then from an affordability side, you connect that with access. From an affordability standpoint, an investment in Front Range Passenger Rail is going to expand people's access, affordable access to higher ed if you're a student, medical centers, right, if you're maybe a senior citizen and you live far away from a hospital or a clinic or something like that. Increasing options to get to the airport, to not have to pay for the really expensive parking at Denver International Airport, and putting those pieces together kind of into those two buckets. So I think kind of after talking with you guys tonight, that's what I'm thinking about, is like, is there a way for us to kind of compress the benefits, the pitch, kind of the painful starting point of where we are today, right? There are real pain points today that this project is going to make less terrible through options, and then the affordability piece. And if we can kind of compress it into that sort of pitch, Danny, to your point, it's not going to work for everyone. It's not directed at everyone. But if we had to kind of have something that's kind of catered to a very broad audience, I think that something where we could refine it kind of like two coherent buckets as the two basic reasons why to vote for this. I think would make an in-person delivery a lot easier. I don't know how you guys kind of what your reaction to that is.
I'd say that sounds good, and I'll take Noah's advice that it's probably time for us to wrap our conversation. We covered a lot of ground, but I'm feeling good about we've kind of reached a good stopping point.
Yeah.
Terrific.
Apologies.
Well, cheers. One more cheers. Oh, your camera ran out of battery, Connor?
I think it overheated.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess just one more cheers to ColoRail. You guys put on a phenomenal event today. Everybody I talked to came away inspired and hopeful and energized about what's to come. So huge thanks to you guys again for putting that together. I was honored to be a part of it, and I think we've got some terrific stuff to work with as we put together kind of this vision for this project and do everything we can, where if the project's going to the ballot in 2026, we're going to do everything we can from an advocacy side to be ready to support it.
Great. Well, thank you, James, for getting us all together tonight and for helping facilitate our conversation.
Terrific. All right. Good night, everybody. Until next time, be well.
Thank you.
Take care. Good night.